Hello, and thank you for joining the podcast Emergency Minute. Your host is an emergency medicine physician who brings over 20 years of experience in healthcare. Dr. Parente will take you through some of the trending topics and challenges faced in the ER and all of healthcare. Join in the fight against misinformation, and don't forget to follow on social media at Dr. J. Parente. Now, here's your host, Dr. John Parente.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Emergency Minute. This is episode 16. Everything you know about obesity is wrong. So I appreciate everyone for checking in last week for COVID, what really happened. That was episode 15. The feedback I've gotten from that show has absolutely blown me away. But without question, the most amount of texts and phone calls and emails and messages and comments I've ever received from a show. So much love to you guys. I truly do appreciate that. But apparently, if you haven't had a chance to hear that show, that is my best show from the feedback that I've gotten. So you may want to check that out and find out what really happened at the hospital level. I think it's kind of going to surprise you. There's a lot of people that didn't realize what was happening at the hospital level during the pandemic over these last 3 years. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about obesity and weight loss. This is obviously not meant to be a highly scientific medical lecture that I'm going to provide you with references, etc. But that does not mean that what I'm going to tell you is inaccurate. It is very accurate, and it is vetted from a scientific standpoint. There's an entire field of obesity medicine that has been basically birthed because of this disease entity. So obviously this podcast can't get into all of the variables that impact obesity. There's literally too many to list. We're going to talk about hormones. We're going to talk about hunger, satiation, which means the feeling of being full. We're even going to talk about stress hormones like cortisol and insulin. There's not one single cure for every person, just like some people may need multiple medications for high blood pressure, or maybe they need more medications for their diabetes or any other chronic diseased condition. So why am I doing this? Well, honestly, a lot of reasons. First of all, I'm very passionate about weight loss. As many of you know, I did participate in starting a physician-guided weight loss company years ago. And, we helped a lot of patients lose a lot of weight, and that, clinic still does function today. There's also so much misinformation about weight loss and obesity medicine. I guarantee you, if you go on any social media platform, you will find plenty of experts that are willing and wanting to share their opinion with you. And to be quite honest, most of it is 100% wrong. So including the healthcare community, by the way, the healthcare community is absolutely dead wrong. Dead wrong. And it's really unfortunate that there's like this stigma with obesity. There's all this misinformation. There's all these so-called experts online, and we're just going to have to try to navigate these waters. But I can assure you, everything I'm going to tell you today is vetted in science and absolutely is accurate to the best of my ability, to the best of the ability of the research that's been done. All right. This is definitely going to be a podcast of cliches. There's going to be plenty that you're going to hear from me, calories in versus calories out. It's just diet and exercise. I know what I need to do. I just need to do it. Bullshit. So this is going to be some of the things that we're going to talk about here today. So what are my qualifications? Well, besides being board certified in emergency medicine, starting a company that did treat patients with weight loss, I did go through training with Obesity Medical Association, opened that physician guided weight loss clinic as well. So I have a lot of experience in this field, and I just want to share that with you because I think this is something that obviously is one of the biggest problems facing the world today in healthcare. And it's so misunderstood and so mismanaged that I wanted to shed some light on this. So why do we care as a whole? Well, as a whole, we're just scratching the surface of the treatment for this. And, as we said before, there's so much misinformation. Even healthcare, physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants are judging patients, casting this negative stigma, fat shaming people. And it's unfortunately all born out of just pure ignorance. This is a massive disease burden on healthcare dollars, etc. We know obesity is bad. We know it increases, obviously, heart attacks, strokes, things like that. But what people don't realize is it has a very high association with almost all forms of cancer as well. So there's going to be some myths along the way. There's going to be some pearls that I'm going to give you if you are trying to lose weight. So just stay tuned and we'll get into that as we go along. All right, in order to do this podcast, the first thing that we need to identify is we need to identify and accept obesity as a disease. Now, that's going to be hard for some people out there because, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, people think that obesity is a choice, that people are just driving through the McDonald's drive-through lane 3 times a day and having ice cream before bed and drinking 6 cases of beer. And yeah, we're going to talk about that. Obviously, like any disease process, there are multiple variables that do change and impact the care or the progression of that disease. But step one is identifying this as a disease. And I promise you, this is factual. And just like you may believe the world is flat and you may believe all kinds of other nonsense that's out there right now, the reality is this is a disease. So I think a lot of people are going to say, well, it's due to video games. It's due to the sedentary lifestyle that we live. There's more, preservatives in our food. We have more desk jobs now than we ever have. Working out is much more difficult because we work so much, we have less time. Yeah, all of those things are true. That is true. And yes, food choice, timing of food content are extremely important. But so are cortisol levels, and good luck reducing those. The reality is, like many other disease entities, obesity has so many variables that its cause nor its treatment can be singularly defined. And I want to say that again, you cannot simply say the cure to obesity is less video games. It's work out more. It's eat better. It's all of these things. There's a lot of things to go through. So let's go through some myths first, and then that way that'll kind of help frame our conversation. So myth number 1 is obesity is a choice. Now, there are, certainly bad choices people can make when it comes to the food that they're putting in their body, 100%. I'm not disputing that. If you have someone that you know that has obesity and they drive through the McDonald's drive-through 3 times a day, 7 days a week, obviously, that is not a good choice. Obviously, that is at least contributing, if not the cause of obesity for that particular person. So yes, you can make bad choices. You can make good choices. But the person that we're talking about and the vast majority of the people that this podcast will hopefully resonate with are the people that are honestly trying to lose some weight and be healthier. And they're making good choices or maybe slightly not great choices, because there may be some ignorance on what choices to make, but they have to understand that there's so many other variables. And by the way, it just could be in the protoplasm that they may just have obesity, just like someone may have hypertension, and that's not their fault either, or diabetes, and that may not be their fault either, or asthma, or, fill in the chronic disease entity. High cholesterol is a great example. 95% of cholesterol patients are actually driven by genetics, not by what they're actually eating and drinking. So we get into this going back to step 1, and I'll get back to this over and over again in this podcast, obesity as a disease, not a choice. That's myth number 1. All right. Myth number 2, exercise causes weight loss. That is incorrect. This has been studied extensively, and exercise alone will help you lose maybe a couple of pounds per year, not that much. So yes, is it helpful? Yes. Would I recommend it? Of course. I'm not saying don't exercise, but if your entire goal is to lose weight and you don't want to change anything in your diet or medications, and we'll get into medications later, you don't want to do anything other than exercise, you're probably not going to lose a lot of weight. And they've studied this, and basically if you looked at diet alone, diet plus exercise, and those are the things that are going to make it a lot better. What it has been shown to do, however, is help with when you do lose the weight, to help with the maintenance, to help you stay low. Because as we're going to talk about later in the podcast, a lot of patients go on these things, they lose some weight, and then guess what happens? They gain it back, right? So the exercise piece is critical in keeping the weight off once you do actually lose that weight. So that is going to be very key to what we're trying to explain here. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands that exercise in and of itself does not cause weight loss. All right, myth number 3, it's just calories in versus calories out. Or the other phrase, it's energy in versus energy out. This is incorrect. Now, the reason why is because if you created a 500 calorie deficit, eventually you just keep losing weight until you're 0 pounds, right? If that's all this was, I just need to simply create this calorie deficit and then I'll just lose weight forever and ever and ever. That's not realistic, right? That's not going to happen. If I need 2,000 calories to live and I'm eating 1,500 calories a day, I'm not just going to whittle away to 0 pounds. That's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. So the body regulates this through what we define in this field as a set point. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But essentially, this is the body's defense mechanism. And if you eat less, the next time you do eat, your body will, defend itself and turn that into fat storage for future use, since the body is geared towards the defensive thinking, saying, the calories have been reduced. I might need to store these for survival in the future. And you have to remember, the human body is wired to survive. And you can't think about it as someone that's, living in 2023, as crazy as our world is these days. You have to think about it, way back when, thousands of years ago, when obviously we couldn't just go up to the, store or go to the restaurant and eat, 3,000 calories with, just a swipe of a credit card. We're talking about very primitive times when people had to actually fight for food, and the body was geared and wired towards then using that for future storage for survival. So, I think it's really important that people understand that it's not simply calories in versus calories out. Now, is that going to be a part of a weight loss program? Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, you can't have 6,000 calories a day and be like, I'm going to lose weight. It's going to be great. Not without cocaine anyways. I'm just joking. So I digress. Moving on. Myth number 4, all calories are created equal. Well, this is definitely not true. I mean, if you ingest 400 calories from Skittles versus 400 calories from avocado, which obviously has nutritional value, some fiber, some good fats, etc., those are two completely different 400 calories, right? Like, that's completely different. When we had the weight loss clinic, we had a guy who came in and was elderly and obviously had a hard time kind of understanding what we were explaining to him. And we needed to do a better job explaining it to him. But, we did tell him that, a healthier snack and an alternative would be peanuts. Well, he promptly went home and ate like 10 cans of peanuts over the next several days. And he actually gained weight. And he came back to us and was super pissed because he gained this weight. And we got down to the bottom of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how many peanuts have you been eating? So just because something's healthy for you doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for weight loss. Those are two different things. I talk about avocados all the time. Obviously, good fats in that, very good nutritional value, high in fiber, but also very high in calorie. If you're trying to lose weight, avocados may not be a great choice for you if you're trying to create a bit of a calorie deficit. And then we had another patient that basically stopped drinking Pepsi, but then just drank fruit juice all day long, which is almost as bad, not quite, but almost as bad as just drinking Pepsi all day, because it's pretty much pure sugar, especially the way things are made today. So not all calories are created equal. All right, myth number 5, I know what I need to do. I just need to do it. That's not true at all. Most people honestly don't know. They don't know what to do. And that's the need for obesity medicine physicians. Now, are there people out there that are eating fast food 3 meals a day and burning the candle at both ends and, going 100 miles an hour in their life, but not focusing on their, nutritional content, not focusing on their exercise, etc.? Should they stop doing those things? Sure. I think there are some choices that we can all make that are better choices. But the reality is the majority of people are trying to do this well, or at least they think they are trying to do this best, but they really don't know. I'm going to eat a whole bunch of fruits and vegetables, and that's going to be, the focus of my diet. Okay, well, great. Well, don't forget that most fruits are really simple sugars. So you got to be careful with that too. So there's a lot of myths in there that people unfortunately kind of follow these things along, and they are doing their best. And I don't know how many times I've heard Doc, I'm doing everything I can. I just can't lose the weight. And part of it's because they honestly don't know what to do. And the other part of that, as we're going to get to later, is there are things out there that are beyond their control. The body's set point that we're going to talk about, cortisol levels from stress make it very difficult to lose weight. So there's definitely some things that people honestly just don't know. And furthermore, this isn't that simple. There's not a one-stop shop cure fix of this disease, right? I tell this to patients all the time. Oh, look, you have high blood pressure. You need to take high blood pressure medicine. And every now and then, probably once a week or once every couple of weeks, I get someone who's like, no, I'm not taking the medicine. I can change this. I can fix this. I'm cutting out all my caffeine. I'm going to run 100 miles a day. I'm going to cut out my salts. I'm going to cut out. Guess what? Good for you. You can do all those things. But statistically, if you do all of those things, in the vast majority of patients, you're going to shave a couple of points off of your blood pressure, because most of blood pressure is what we call essential hypertension, meaning it just sort of friggin' happens. And you just have to accept it, take the medication, lower it. I'm not saying you can't do those other things and try to cut back on your sodium and things like that, but at the vast majority of patients do not have the ability to simply lower their blood pressure. And, so I think that kind of goes along with what we're talking about with these chronic disease entities. I know what I need to do. I just need to do it. That's often not true. All right. Myth number 6, I need to lose just a little bit of weight, 20 or 30 pounds, and then it'll be okay. I'll be able to keep it off. Understand that that is absolutely not true. Just the same way we talked about. If you go on medication for your blood pressure, for your diabetes, what happens? Yeah, your numbers get better. Well, then do you come off the medication? No, that's ridiculous. If you have asthma and you take your inhaler and you got your inhaled corticosteroids, your steroids, and you're breathing better and you're coughing less and you're wheezing less, do you then come off the medicine? No, and this gets back to step one, accepting obesity as a chronic disease, because that's exactly what it is. And so you don't need to just lose the weight and then you're going to be fine. You need to lose the weight, continue to learn to make those better choices. And, some of the things we're going to talk about in this thing, and a lot of times be on medication, and that's what's going to help you keep it off. And like we talked about earlier in one of the other myths, obviously exercise will help you keep off that weight as well. But understand the concept of the body's set point. So what is the body's set point? Well, it's kind of hard to define this, but it makes some sense if you think about this from like an evolutionary standpoint. So I'm trying to lose weight. I lose 30 pounds. I'm feeling great about myself. But the body's saying to me, whoa, I just lost 30 pounds of fat storage. My survival has now been reduced, etc. Like that's the way the body is sort of maintained. So we're wired to survive. We're wired to store nutrients and fat and everything else. And we still don't fully understand this set point, but understand this. And if you listen to nothing else on the rest of this podcast, listen to this. When you lose a significant portion of weight, the body will fight like hell to get it back. And that's what you have to understand. And that's why when people say that it's your fault and why are you doing that? And shame on you. Like, no, shame on them for judging you and not understanding the science behind this. And that's why, we look at these things like every weight loss plan on earth, from Nutrisystem, Weight Watchers, fad diets, keto diets, etc. Almost all of them have exactly the same curve. They all lose 3 to 5% in that first year, with almost 100% of these weight loss patients returning to their baseline weight after the fact or higher in 1 year. So that is the reality of almost every diet on planet Earth. So before you're like, oh, I went on this diet, it's the best diet ever. It's probably not. It probably helped you for a while, but eventually your body will fight like hell to get that weight back. Now, how do we know this? Well, there's been a lot of research around this, and one of the biggest research studies that's ever been done, and actually is still ongoing, is called the National Weight Control Registry, which was started back in 1993. And this is a few thousand individuals and is what is likely the longest research study in obesity medicine history. Basically, these people are people who could lose around 30 pounds and keep it off. And they've done a ton of studies, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of the studies, but basically some of the conclusions that they had, basically these individuals monitored every single item that they put in their mouth holes. They exercise at minimum 60 minutes per day, every single day. And they did track every single thing that they ate and drank. So my conclusion, yes, it is possible to lose weight with simply diet and exercise. But boy, is it difficult. And also, this is where the data comes from, that exercise is great for weight maintenance, but not for weight loss. So it's a fascinating study. If you want to read more about it, I would recommend it. The National Weight Control Registry. Fascinating stuff. All right, shifting gears here. I want to talk about that one friend that we all have, that we all hate, that, can eat like 6,000 calories a day. They eat like 27 times a day. And, they're 5'10" and they weigh 132 pounds. So we obviously know that there is this component of genetics involved, and people talk about things, I got to check my thyroid, or I think this is my metabolic rate, and there's all these other fancy, terms that people throw out there. A lot of this stuff, make no mistake, we don't understand yet. We're still learning and scratching the surface. But one interesting study was done on rats with fecal transplants, and this was a very interesting study. So they isolated basically, and I hate to use this word, but I'm gonna say it. They basically had a skinny rat and a fat rat, and they put them together, and they did fecal transplants. So they put the stool of the skinny rat and they put it inside the fat rat, and the fat rat's stool went inside the skinny rat. Then they fed them the exact same amount of food. They isolated them from the rest of the rat pack, so to speak, and they gave them the exact same amount of activity as far as time on the little exercise bike or whatever. It's not an exercise bike, but we're trying to be funny here. And then obviously what ended up happening was the skinny rat became obese and the obese rat became skinnier. I mean, conclusion here, obviously more studies need to be performed on actual humans. I'm not sure we're, a couple years away from transplanting stool into each other, although we have done that for C. diff, which is obviously a bacterial condition for the gut. But, make no mistake, gut flora, which is the normal bacteria that lives inside of our guts that we don't even know is there, is almost certainly involved in causing or being a part of obesity. And look, if you're big pharma, if you're capitalistic, would you not be interested in gaining this knowledge and then creating a pill that could target whatever protein, receptor, microbiome, whatever it may be that is playing in that role, treating or perhaps curing millions or even billions of people with obesity? Yeah, I mean, obviously this has got to be a huge target for big pharma right now because this is a very fascinating study that basically concludes, and we've seen this now, that stool and our gut flora absolutely is involved somehow, some way in obesity. So that's fascinating as well. All right, shifting gears here. So we're going to talk about some treatment options. Yes, obviously we talked about this before. Diet and exercise do make a difference. The old expression of abs are made in the kitchen does hold true. So let's talk about surgical. I don't want to get into this a lot because this is, fairly radical treatment, but it is superior. It is the best and safest treatment out there as of today. Now there's gastric sleeves. There's obviously the gastric bypass. This has been around since like the 1950s or 60s, but obviously as medicine advances more quickly, we increase our knowledge base and so does our surgical practice. So why does this bypass work? It reduces the quantity of food that you can put in your stomach organ, but really it increases satiety, which is that sensation that I, feel like I'm full. And so you do less eating, and perhaps more importantly, it reduces that hunger hormone, which we call ghrelin. So that's one of the most powerful hormones in the human body. And again, getting back to how we were wired in a primitive manner, survival, right? We need survival. In order to have survival, we need to have hunger. If we have hunger, we're going to go out and we're going to hunt and gather and we're going to get food, and then we're going to produce storage, and then we're going to survive longer. And you have to think about this from a very primitive way. So now, what are the complications? Well, yeah, there's surgical complications involved with bypass surgery, infection, small bowel obstruction, splenic injuries, and then you have the nutritional things like B12, iron, deficiencies, things like that, anemia. The mortality is about 0.1%. Is that okay? I mean, I guess if you're the person that dies, no, it's not okay. But I would ask you, what is the mortality of untreated obesity? That's the kicker. That's the hard thing. So let's talk a little bit about medications moving on, because I think we're going to start to see that medications are gaining ground on the surgical treatment for obesity. And I think that this is really where this field gets exciting. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is phentermine. Now, phentermine has been around forever. And here's my rant, so I apologize. Number one, pronounce it correctly. If you're a physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant, and you say the word phentermine, you should probably have your license revoked on the spot. It's phentermine. That's how you say it. It's full of misinformation. It is not addictive. And it is finally time for Ohio and the State Pharmacy Board and the State Medical Board of Ohio. We finally are on board with allowing patients to receive this treatment year round. Congratulations on doing this. You're the last state out of 50 states that has allowed patients to receive that treatment. Every other state for the last, several decades has been able to receive treatment with this medication year round. Not Ohio. In Ohio, we had to have it on for 3 months and then have it off for 6. And then you could go back on it for 3 months. And so what do you think happens to patients when they're on a weight loss medication for 3 months? They lose weight. What do you think happens when they go off the medication for 6 months? They gain it back. And then it's absolutely asinine. And again, goes back to my whole point and my entire existence on social media and in the podcast world is healthcare is broken. And this is the front row seat to how broken it is. All right, so the mechanism of action for phentermine is basically that it is an appetite suppressant, but if you talk to most people in obesity medicine, there does seem to be some type of secondary stimulating, not a side effect, but a property of this medication that helps patients lose weight as well. So a couple things I want to talk about are the idiot physicians that are prescribing the full dose right off the rip, which is Adipex. A lot of people have heard of that, 37.5 milligrams. Why on earth would you start a patient on the highest dose of the medication before anything else further? Now, if this patient's been on this medicine before and they're ramping up and that's their dose, fine. But if a patient comes to see you in the office, would you start them on 40 milligrams of lisinopril, the highest dose that we could possibly have? No, you start them on a lower dose and then you go up. So we don't do this for hypertension. We don't do this for diabetes. We don't do this for seizure disorder. Why on God's green earth are some of these physicians, they go in and they see these, their patients go in and see them and they're like, oh, here you go, 37.5 milligrams of Adipex. And then what happens? Well, these people feel jittery. They feel anxious. It's a bit of a stimulant. So a lot of people don't tolerate it at that high dose. So no, go to someone that knows what they're doing. Start with 15 milligrams. You can go to 30. And then yes, the max dose is 37.5 milligrams. All right, so the challenge of this medication is that you need to be able to show weight loss on this medication in order to qualify to receive treatment. Well, in the beginning, that's easy, right? If your BMI is over 30 and you need a medication and you're willing to try this medication to help you lose weight, great. But what happens after you lose the weight and your BMI drops down below 27, you don't have any risk factors to quote unquote qualify for that medication? Well, you can't just keep losing weight forever, right? Again, we talked about how you're just going to go down to 0 pounds. So technically, the way the law is written right now is kind of a gray area because, look, if I take this medication and I have a BMI of 35 and I get down to 27, 26, which would be, by the way, life-changing, amazing, phenomenal, great stuff for my health. And then all of a sudden the state pharmacy board is going to say like, well, yeah, but you're not losing weight anymore. Well, and you don't qualify because your BMI is now 26. Well, but I need the medication in order to keep the weight off. It'd be like you were diabetic and we got your blood sugars under control after being on medications for a few months. But then because we weren't able to show that you were continually lowering your diabetes or your glucose levels, that you had to come off the medications. It makes no sense, right? It's absolutely preposterous, but that's where we're at. So it gets into a very gray area of where the law is written. Now, what I like to say is that if your BMI is 35, then that's what I'm going to put on the prescription because that's what your BMI is. And if you go down to 26, like God bless you, that means that you have this disease under very good control and the medication is going to help you stay there. So it gets into a gray area, but it does show you how broken healthcare is. Opioids aren't regulated as tightly as phentermine in the state of Ohio, which by the way is a class 3. It's barely even on the registry, but somehow it's so tightly regulated. It's just healthcare is broken. Like we talked about before, if you have high blood pressure, you take the medicines, your blood pressure comes down. That doesn't mean you're cured of hypertension and you stop taking the medication. Do the same thing for diabetes or any other chronic disease entity. But I guess this is where we get into the part of the show where we have to start understanding that this is a disease, or do we just keep fat shaming people and blaming them for the disease? All right, my rant is over, maybe, if you're lucky. All right, so there's a lot of other medications out there that I think aren't quite as good. So I'll kind of briefly go over those. Belviq, Qsymia, which basically is phentermine with Topamax. There's a medicine called Contrave that really sort of is geared towards like food and hunger cravings. Then there's Orlistat, which is involved with absorption of food. And then there's Plenity, which kind of helps you feel full before you actually have your meal. Then came along some diabetes medications that you've probably heard of at some point, Victoza and Saxenda. And it was almost by accident that physicians started realizing that not only were these great for treating their patients' diabetes, but it actually was helping their patients lose a lot of weight. So this is kind of what propelled us into the GLP-1 medications for weight loss, not just diabetes. Now, these new medications are offering great hope. We change the way we approach obesity based on these medications. I'm sure many of you probably know someone recently that lost a ton of weight, and you've probably noticed and you're like, I wonder what they're doing. I would almost guarantee they're on a GLP medication. So what are some of these medications? Well, the first one that we kind of heard about, I mean, obviously Victoza and Saxenda were out there, but I think the one that sort of took fire was Wegovy, which is semaglutide. This is a once weekly injection, and this is that GLP-1 agonist. Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, it means you start at a lower dose due to these GI side effects. It's something that's increased up to a max dose of 2.4 milligrams weekly. So it inhibits some hormones such as glucagon, and it causes insulin to be secreted if necessary, slowing gastric emptying and peristalsis. And peristalsis is just the medical term for the food sort of transitioning through the body where you absorb nutrients and obviously eventually excrete it. But when you slow this part down, this makes you not as hungry and you get full. You have that satiety faster. So remember how we talked about most weight loss programs losing 3 to 5%, and then everybody gets all the weight put back on as soon as they stop their diet or like a year later? Well, let's look at Wegovy. Nearly everybody in the study lost at least 5% body weight. So that's good. I mean, we're already at the high end of what every other diet on earth can do. Well, about half of these patients lost 15%. And like 1/3 of the patients lost almost 20%. So that's like a 250-pound man weighing 200 pounds now, losing 50 pounds. Now let's look at Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide. Now these patients lost 7% across the board. Half lost 15%. And then the top third was over 21%. So these numbers are staggering. That is life-changing. Now, what's the problem with these medications? Well, there's a couple. The side effects, there's a lot of GI upset and intolerance. Obviously, cost. Of course, these big pharma companies are going to try to make their bank on this. And availability. The entire globe is trying to get their hands on these medications. And by the way, you have obesity patients trying to get them. And then you have diabetes patients trying to get their hands on them. And then you have patients, obviously, who may have both. And most insurances aren't covering these medications, which I get it in the short term because they're super expensive. But if you think about the economic and financial impact of obesity long term, it's mind-boggling that they wouldn't. Now, it is contraindicated if you have a history of MEN, which is multiple endocrine neoplasia, and it can also cause some form of medullary thyroid carcinoma. So now, obviously people are going to say, well, if I'm the guy that gets the medullary thyroid carcinoma, like I'm probably going to be pretty pissed off about this medication. Yeah, you're right. If that's you, or if that's your wife or your husband or your grandmother or something, like, yeah, you're going to be upset that that's one of the potential effects of this medication. But again, I get to the other side of that is what's the overall impact of treating thousands or millions of people with obesity, lowering, overall people's risk of cancer, heart disease, stroke, etc. Obviously, like anything in life, there's a balance. But I think, for people to be freaking out about the side effects of this medication, I would ask them how they're doing with their obesity management right now. And I guarantee you that this is probably a safer option. So now, these people obviously are real people. These people are out there losing a ton of weight. They need to buy new clothes. And now maybe they don't need 3 blood pressure medicines. If you're 350 pounds and you get down to 220 pounds and you're exercising more and you're eating well and you're on these medications and your glucose is more tightly regulated, there's a good chance you may not need to be on 3 blood pressure medicines, or maybe you don't need to be on any of those medicines at all. Do you need to be on your diabetes medications? When you have this other injection, you may not need that either. What about the things that we can't measure? What about the reduced risk for cancer? And we know that this is one of the single biggest risk factors for cancer. And then what about the other stuff that no one's talking about because it's not sexy to talk about? What about depression, anxiety, the social impact of walking into a room and being 220 pounds versus walking into a room and being 350 pounds? What about people's ability to exercise now that they've lost 100 pounds? We know that obesity is a chronic state of inflammation. So what about somebody's reduced pain? These are all things that have to be taken into consideration. So this is really where I get excited about the future of obesity medicine as a specialty. Obesity medicine is medicine's newest specialty. And I think there's a definite need for this based on a couple things. Number one, there's a massive global demand for people that need help losing weight, managing obesity. There's no question. Number two, most physicians are complete idiots when it comes to this. Literally, I have had so many people tell me it's just diet and exercise and all the other myths we covered in the beginning of this podcast. It's just not true. Third, I think we're just scratching the surface of this disease and the treatment. We look at all the different hormones that are playing a role here. We look at different types of, we talked about stool transportation. All right, probably not stool transportation. That'd be kind of weird. Like, I don't know, it's like a school bus just driving around with stool in it. No, transplantation of stool, and the impact that had on the rats. Then we're looking at all the different hormones. The ghrelin hormone, that is our hunger hormone. If you're a big pharma, are you going to target that? Hell yeah, you are. What about the other things that sort of trigger our brain to tell us that we're full? What about cortisol, which really makes it difficult for us to lose weight? What if there's a way to do that? There's no pill you can take to reduce stress. Other than I guess bourbon and Xanax. But my point is we're just scratching the surface on how to approach this disease. And it's so multifactorial on how we can be effective at treating it. So I think there is an opportunity here for physician-guided weight loss clinics. This is why obviously I started 1 year ago, and you start to see more and more of these things pop up, and more physicians are getting additional education so that they can appropriately treat their patients, which is great to see. All right. What are some things that you can do? So this is the part of the podcast that I wanted to kind of give hope to some people out there that you don't necessarily have to make these dramatic, massive changes to your life. There are a few things that you can do. All of these are rooted in science. And if you want me to like send you the link on all these, I certainly can. But here's a couple of things that are very easy to do if you wanted to start helping to be healthier and lose weight. Number one, start off each day drinking 20 ounces of freezing cold water. I do this almost every single day of my life. Number one, it's healthy. You're getting water. It's a good way to feel full in the morning so you're not feeling hungry all throughout the day. And it does kind of kickstart your metabolism. You hear that sort of catchy phrase, I want something to jumpstart my metabolism. I'm going to go have 3,000 calories at breakfast. Yeah, or you can have a 20-ounce freezing cold water, which is very, very good as well. Number two, what else can you do? If you know you're having dinner at whatever, 6 o'clock, just pound a giant thing of water 30 minutes prior to your meal. Remember, this is going to help you get full faster. Hormones that signal satiety are delayed, meaning you are actually full before you know you are full, before your brain is told that it is full. So typically what we do, and we all eat fairly quickly, we have these busy lifestyles, we're going to eat whatever's on the plate, right? So that's number three. Eat off of smaller plates. This will definitely help you reduce your portion sizes and help you lose weight. Number four, don't eat within 4 hours of bedtime. This set a rule. If you go to bed at midnight, don't eat after 8. That's, easy to do. Now, if you're someone that works till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, that gets into some tricky situations, because what you don't want to do is say, well, I don't want to eat in the last 4 hours, so I better get McDonald's on the way home, and then you're making bad choices too. So that's part of it. Now, number five, avoid carbs, but if you do have to have a carb, make it mandatory that you have a protein with it. So let me explain this to you. So if I just have a carbohydrate, my body, so I eat the carbohydrate, this big giant potato, and I have this like simple carb in my body. What happens is there's a big spike in the insulin, and then eventually there's this sort of crash. That's the kind of thing that causes diabetes. Big insulin surges and then crash after the fact. And it makes the insulin very ineffective. And that's what causes insulin resistance. And you hear that term for type 2 diabetes. Now, what happens if I have the potato, but I also have a chicken breast with it? Well, that big giant spike that you see in the insulin from the pancreas, it's not going to have that. It's going to be much more mitigated. It's going to be much more reduced. Therefore, the crash won't be nearly as reduced, which means the sort of developing insulin resistance is not going to happen. So a lot of people are like, oh, I got to avoid carbs. I got to avoid carbs. Okay. I mean, that's a good approach. But one thing you can do is if you're going to have carbs, just have a protein with it. It's that simple. Number six, track what you eat. There are plenty of apps out there, and I'm not going to get into that. But basically, it has been shown that people who are trying to lose weight will be more effective if they use some type of tracking mechanism where they're documenting exactly what they're putting into their body. All right, number seven. Number seven is get 7 hours of sleep and try to have it roughly at the same time. This was done at the University of Wisconsin. There was a sleep study that was done that basically showed the people that were trying to lose weight were most effective when they got roughly 7 hours of sleep. Anything less, if you get 5, you're probably going to have high levels of cortisol, going to be very difficult for you to lose weight. If you have 8 or 9, definitely way too much sleep. So they looked at this as the most effective way to lose weight was roughly 7 hours of sleep. Too much or too little will otherwise slow it down. Now, number 8 is the one that, I'm not really loving to talk about here, but it is very obvious. This one makes me very sad, but avoid alcohol. And I heard this expression the other day, alcohol is the great thief. And that makes a lot of sense. It steals time. How many times have you had a bunch of drinks and you're like, man, that football game just flew by? Or, you're at a pool or something and you're drinking, and then all of a sudden you're like, man, I feel like I've had a few drinks, and all of a sudden it's nighttime already. What happened? So obviously it steals our time. It definitely steals our money. Have you seen any of the costs of drinks these days? It steals our metabolism. Unfortunately, sometimes it steals our memory, and it is a massive cause of weight gain, or at least a maximum prevention of us losing weight. But number 9, if you do decide to drink, be smart about it. Drinking 20 beers and eating a large pizza, that's bad life choices. But if you have like a vodka soda, and then every other one you skip and you drink with some water, obviously that's a better choice. You got to be careful with mixers. This is still number 9, because orange juice, cranberry juice, Sprite, Coke, etc. If you use that all day and you have 20 different drinks, that's going to definitely inhibit your ability to lose weight. It's just all pure sugar. And you're going to want to replace that with water, soda, ice, etc., mixing in with water. So, there's definitely a way to still enjoy your life and have a few cocktails, but just make slightly better choices along the way. And then there's obviously number 10, which is my favorite, and I think it's not that difficult, is intermittent fasting. And I love this strategy. It's extremely effective. And it's not so much about what you eat as opposed to when you eat it. And there's many different ways to do this. The most common two things that people look at is the 16-8, which means you fast for 16 hours, but then you're able to eat for the 8. That's not to say you sit down at a table and you just start, gorging it for 8 hours, but you get the idea. And then the other one that's very common is the 5-2, which is you only eat one meal per day, 2 days out of the week. And the other 5 days of the week, you eat normally, or maybe you reduce or whatever. Maybe there's some fasting along the way, but at the same time, you're still eating, still doing those things. So the fasting allows the body to empty all of its glucose storage, and then it starts to burn the fat for energy. So think about it logically. When you eat 3 meals per day, then you're probably snacking and things like that. Your body runs on those calories. So you never really hit the fat storage part of the metabolism, which makes weight loss very difficult. So if you sort of rob the body of those, multiple meals throughout the day and you use intermittent fasting, that's where that fat storage can get targeted, and that's what's going to cause weight loss. Now, you have to be careful with this. Obviously, you don't want to go too long. You don't want to go longer than 24 hours, 48 hours, God forbid, 72 hours. This is very dangerous. Can drop your sugar levels, can cause some serious harm if you do this. And it actually may trigger the body to go into an increased fat storage mode due to starvation. Remember what we talked about before, going back, primitive human beings, they're wired and geared to defend and to survive long term. So if the body says, I haven't had any calories in the last 48 hours. Next time you give me calories, I'm putting that straight into storage. And then all of a sudden you're in a fat storage mode. You're actually gaining weight. So you have to be careful with that. But obviously intermittent fasting does work. Another thing you want to be cautious with is if you're pregnant, if you're diabetic, or if you have an eating disorder such as body dysmorphia, you have to be very careful with something like this. And I'm going to go off script here for 1 minute. Can I do that? I think so. This one's definitely going to get me in trouble, but what the hell? One of my favorite analogies in healthcare is to talk about how we don't treat anorexia with bariatric surgery. So why on earth are we treating the mental illness of gender identity disorder, aka the trans movement, with radical surgeries and extremely harmful injections of hormones? Healthcare is broken. And I'll leave you with that positive and uplifting thought. All right, well, that's all I have for today. I want to thank everyone for joining me with this discussion, and I hope this sheds some light on obesity and weight loss and clears up a lot of the myths that do sort of exist within the weight loss and obesity world, all the misinformation. Again, thank you to everyone who checked in last week for what really happened during COVID. And don't forget to join me next time for additional discussion on how broken healthcare is. Definitely going to want to stick around for that one. Not want to miss that. I'll be out next week, so you won't hear from me for another 2 weeks. Going on vacation to get some vitamin C. And by C, I mean SEA. And maybe some fruit juices in my cocktails in my room. All right, but as always, peace, love, and happiness to everyone out there. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks for joining us this week on Emergency Minute. Join us next time for more hard-hitting discussions on some of today's issues in healthcare. Don't forget to leave us a review on Spotify or follow on social media at Dr. J. Parente.